Okay, Megan Soun, welcome to the show. This is going to be episode number 60, I think, of the Yellow Chair podcast. So you've been on like twice now. This is your third time coming on. How do you feel?
I feel honored for this to be my third time.
I actually think you're the first three-peat. Jack doesn't count. Jack doesn't count because Jack used to host the podcast. But you're the first three-peat we've ever had on the podcast. So congratulations.
Exciting. It's like SNL, how they have the 5-timers club and they get the jacket. Do I get any sort of thing?
You get the award of being a three-peat.
Thank you so much, Helen. It means the world.
Okay, so the third time you're on, we're actually speaking about the show Severance. So break it down for us. Like, why did you choose this show? What's the show about? And why is it important for our mental health?
Yeah. Severance is so hard to break down in the sense of if you've seen it, it's wild. It's super artistic, very creative. There's a million themes. Yeah. Honestly, preparing for this podcast, because I had watched the show like over a year ago, and so I didn't fully remember all of it. Yeah. And so I had to do some review, and I learned so much by reading other people's recaps and whatnot. But I wanted to talk about it because I think there's just a lot of interesting commentary from the show on work. And personally, I think work has been a big part of my life, I guess you could say, in my own mental health experience. I think work has often been at the core of some of the mental health issues I've dealt with, whether that be anxiety, depression, or burnout. And so I think Severance is a really good jumping off point to dive into some of those topics.
Yeah. Because when I reviewed like the season 1 recap, I thought immediately this is such an interesting concept because the main character, Mark, can't remember his personal life when he's at work, and his work persona can't remember his personal life when he's also at work. I don't think I said that right, but you get the gist. And I think that like this whole concept of work-life balance, I discovered after even just watching the recap, doesn't really exist. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Can you expand on that for me?
Totally. So in case listeners haven't watched, I'll just give them a really quick rundown of what Severance, what that process entails. So in the show, Severance is this medical procedure that people can undergo, where basically your real life persona undergoes the medical procedure, and they do this brain thing where basically once you go to work at this place called Lumen Industries, when you're in the building, you're at work, you don't know your outside of work life. So all those memories you can't access. But then once you leave work, all you can access is your personal life. You have no access to your work memories. So they split it into innies and outies. Your innie is your work self that only knows your work life, and your outie is your real life persona. Wow. And I think you put it really well, Helen, that the show really breaks down this idea of work-life balance, this idea that we can somehow achieve some perfect harmony between the two or separate the two out. And I find this really interesting because I think as a therapist, a lot of times when I'm working with clients who are struggling with work and burnout and whatnot, they'll feel a lot of shame for how they can't compartmentalize fully. They'll say, I should be able to separate out my work life from my personal life. Or even outside of the work context, you hear clients sometimes talk about this idea of, I should be able to separate myself into these different pieces and it'd be really neat, but I can't. Why can't I? And I think the show does a really beautiful job of highlighting just how elusive work-life balance is and how you can't actually sever yourself into two parts. So even though the characters in the show have undergone this procedure, or a lot of them have, where they are severed, there's still little bits and pieces of them from their outer life or work life that bleed into one another. So I'll give a couple examples of that. So Mark, the main character of this show, the reason he underwent severance is he lost his wife in a car crash, and he doesn't want to deal with the grief of that. He really wants to escape the pain. And so he undergoes severance. And so when he's outside of work, he often spends his time coping through drinking. He cries and he goes to work. He doesn't remember what happened, but he can see his eyes are really red from the tears.
Wow.
Or he has wet tissues in his pocket. And so I think it goes both ways. Your personal life is just going to filter into your work life, and your work life is just going to seep into your personal life. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's just that we're one person and we bring all parts of ourselves to all the different domains of our lives.
I have so many questions, but like
Right.
I know that the audience's immediate question is the so what that follows with that. Because I think that, you know, I've sat on the other side of the chair, and I think I can acknowledge as a therapist, and I'm sure you also know this experience, Megan, but I think working for Yellow Chair has provided like a huge privilege to just do a lot of self-reflection in our jobs. But when I'm having a conversation with clients, what I often hear from them is, okay, so what do I do about that then if I can't separate? So what would your answer be to that question?
I think my answer would be, instead of trying to force yourself to compartmentalize, because you're not a puzzle made of a bunch of parts. You're one person. I think it's better to do something to mark the transition between work and life. So what I mean by that is, for me, for example, if at the end of the workday, I end the workday by doing something in my body, I go on a walk or I do yoga, to me, it feels like more of a transition into my non-work life because I've now grounded myself. Or I can give an example of someone I know who is a hospital chaplain. And each day after he would spend the day working with folks going through the hardest sorts of things and dealing with so much heaviness, he would come home, and before going into his house, he would take off his shoes. And he would only let himself wear those shoes in the hospital, and he would never wear them anywhere else. But it was this really big signal or marker to him of, hey, that piece of the day is now done, and now I'm transitioning into a new piece of my life. And so I think it's really important to mark this new transition into the next piece of the day. If you work from home, I think doing something spatially, if you can, if you have one place where you do your work and then you don't go back there at the end of the workday. I think doing things like this can help signal to our brains and bodies more, okay, now I'm shifting into this next piece. And I think another piece, I'll talk about this more maybe later, but I think is making sure that you are doing stuff outside of work that taps into other pieces of who you are rather than your whole life just revolving around work.
What would you say to those people, to your point of use your body, have a transition point, who work freelance, who are in a space where they're self-employed? Because I've also heard that rebuttal as well of, okay, I can't totally separate myself from my job, but I want to be fully present with my family. And so, like, how do I grapple with that?
Yeah. Maybe that looks like carving out certain spaces or certain times, or even if you're someone who can't do a really clean 8 to 5 end of workday break, there's something in your job that demands more work beyond that. I wonder what it could look like to have really clean markers for, I'm working right now in this next hour. And maybe you start that with some sort of mindfulness or some sort of mantra. And then you do the same thing at the end of that time, just to sort of add a step in between personal life and work.
That's so fascinating, Megan. I kind of want to transition into your story and your journey, because I know that the last couple of times I've had you on, you've talked very candidly about your journey with perfectionism, how you've learned to just be more human at work and more human in life. And so speak to like how Severance, did it make you feel seen? And if so, how?
Yeah. So just to share a little bit of my story for those who may not have listened to the first 2 episodes
I'll link it in the description.
Yeah. So I'm a therapist at Yellow Chair. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, a lot of my mental health challenges have been rooted in job stuff. I think I am someone who has really defined myself by my job and just wrapped up so much in my job, whether it's my identity, my value, my worth. And so I think that makes me really susceptible to things like feeling burnt out or anxious or depressed at work. The other piece of this, I think, is being a therapist. So I used to really love school and do well in school, and perfectionism kind of worked for me in school, where because of my perfectionism, I cared a lot about doing well. And I was able to measure that in school based off the grades I got and the feedback I got. But as a therapist, it's not so black and white. It's not so objective. It's really hard to know how good you're doing. It's really hard to know if you're one of the best. And so I think I just place so much pressure on myself, and often without clear indicators of whether or not I was doing a good job, I just assumed I wasn't. And then I would have all these unhealthy narratives in my head of, I'm hurting my clients. There's better people for my clients out there. I'm not doing enough. And it would just make me feel really awful. And that's what would make me more prone to experiencing anxiety and depression and burnout, all of which was compounded by some of these ways that I put jobs on a pedestal of, not only was I struggling with therapy, but if my job is what defines me, if my job is what defines how good my life is, then struggling with work is a really, really bad thing. And so what I really love about Severance is I think you see some of the ways that identifying so much with your work can be dangerous. So because the folks in Severance are severed, for the innies, work is all they know.
Wow.
Because they're not aware of all these other parts of their life, their identity and their whole selves are devoted to their work. So you see initially, before they become more aware of what might be going on at Lumen, they're so devoted, so loyal to the company and their whole any self. All they know is work. And I think that's really dangerous, because I think when all you know is work, you're more likely to define yourself in your life by your work. And I think there's so much danger in that.
Megan, I just kind of want to acknowledge everything that you just shared, because I think as a woman, especially a woman living in the 21st century, and as an Asian woman, I think it's so easy to be defined by what we do and how well we cater to other people, that I relate a lot to your story, especially the part about I allowed myself to be defined by my job. And I share that with you. I think I shared that with you earlier, but like there was a point in my career where I started to like lose some of my hair, and thank God it just started to grow back. It's all back now, all of my hair. But I think that one of the things and truths that I've had to grapple with in my journey, especially as a therapist, and maybe a few listeners can relate to this, is that when you don't know who you are and you don't know what your worth is rooted in, it's so easy to let other people's definition of what good is define your job, define your life, define your character and well-being. And I think that, one of my follow-up questions for you that I was going to ask is like, what's the metric that you're using now to get to a place where there is this holistic view of who Megan is? I can share mine with you after, but I'd love to hear what the change was for you when it came to just self-definition, self-worth, anti-perfection.
It's still a work in progress. In all honesty, I remember, I think last time I was on the podcast was when I was talking about perfectionism, and I felt like I had really worked through it. I gave all these tips and tricks on how to embrace this good enough approach to life and myself. And then shortly after that, went back into another period of being really harsh on myself and really struggling with my mental health. Yeah. So this time I'll just be transparent. I think it's going to be a lifelong journey for me. But I would say, to your point, I think we live in a society where what you do is so defining. I think it's not just me that places my work on a pedestal. I think our whole culture does that. And there's so many reasons I think that we are inclined to do so because of the environment around us. having learned the dangers of that and just seeing how it really doesn't work for me, it makes me feel very bad about myself. And at times, I will add, part of why I'm tempted to do it though, even though it can make me feel so bad about myself, is at times it makes me feel really good about myself. Of when work is going well, I can feel on top of the world and feel like I'm so worthy and whatnot. So I experience both sides of the pendulum. But now, having experienced enough of the bad side, I know that even those jolts of, and my husband and I call them like identity boosters, even those jolts, it's just not worth it with how low things can get afterwards. And so now, to your question of what do I define myself by, it's cheesy, but I think I define myself by a hope that I have inherent worth, that I'm not defined by my achievements, that I don't need to keep climbing because I want to have hope that all people already have worth and they don't need to earn it. It's already there. And so that's what I really try to lean into. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but when I really can do it, it's so freeing.
I already have inherent worth. It's such a backwards way of looking at the world, because I can see that shift in you even now. Like, you're just so much more joyful and like a lot more free, and there's like a goofiness and a quirkiness to you that I haven't seen before. And it's just really refreshing to see this version of Megan, you know? You mentioned your husband earlier. Has being in a relationship helped you kind of get yourself out of your own head? How long have the two of you been together?
Yeah, we've been together for a while now. We've been married for 6 years. Wow. And so I think he's so great. He's just a really lovely reminder of what I'm trying to live into, where my worth is not dependent on the shiny things. Yeah. And even in my worst times, he still shows up and view of me doesn't shift. And I think that's something really powerful that we can do in community, whether it's with your partner or your family or your friends, is just to show the people around you that their worth is not defined by what they do. It's not defined by what they achieve or accomplish, that their worth is simply for who they are.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with my boyfriend about this, because we were talking about, he has long curly blonde hair. It goes up to his shoulders, and he was complaining about how unmanageable it had gotten. And he was showing me these pictures of like all of these different hairstyles he wanted to get. And he said, will this make me better? Like, will this make me better? And I looked at him and I said, you know, even if you just stay looking at how you look, like that's not what makes you you. Like, there are other things underneath that make up your personality. And I had this epiphany for me, because I think that for a long time, beauty standards, especially living in Los Angeles, defined me. What my status was defined me for such a long time. But I think you said something so vulnerable and so sweet when you talk about your husband, is that no matter how I am or no matter what I do, my worth to him doesn't ever shift. And I think the value of having really healthy, grounded relationship that extends beyond the superficial has helped me personally. And it sounds like it's also helped you figure out who you are. It's almost like a mirror of, oh, this is what makes me me outside of what I do.
Totally. And I feel like that is one of my lofty hopes for the world, is that we can be a sort of people that does that for one another. Because I think why so many of us struggle with identifying ourselves by our work and making work so important is because we do it to be liked, to be admired from others, because that's what the world says. Our parents say they're proud of us and we achieve, or people are impressed with us and we say what we do. Or sometimes the opposite. I worked with a lot of clients who talk about the shame they feel from people they know or even strangers for their job not making enough money or for not getting a promotion. And I think we're just social beings who are affected by people around us. And so I'd love for there to be a culture where none of that matters, where when you meet someone, the first question isn't, what do you do?
I feel like that's more common in the South and the Midwest to not ask that question than it is in Los Angeles. Would you agree?
Yeah, I host it's cared about a little bit more.
Yeah. From East Coast, especially like NYC, New York City, and Los Angeles, I noticed that like what you do kind of drives the understanding. But
Mm-hmm.
when you were living in Memphis and when you were living in Durham, right, North Carolina,
Yeah.
like what was culture and language and community like over there compared to living in LA and now Irvine?
Yeah, I think it's a little more laid back, and there's maybe slightly less emphasis on having a job that makes a lot of money. Also, those places are a lot more affordable to live in, so that could
Yeah,
be a
tell me
piece of
about
it
it.
too. But I do think, even regardless, even in those places, I think capitalism has its grip. And so people still care about making money.
Mm-hmm.
People still care about getting into quote unquote good college. I think all of that stuff still really matters, even if it's not to the same degree that you might find on the coast.
Mm. Yeah, I was actually having a similar conversation of like as a functioning member of capitalistic society, how do you not make life about work when 8 hours of my 16-hour day is spent at work and then my conversations bleed into work with, to your point, to your husband, to your sister, to friends and family. Like how do you integrate both things if life is not an and or, if life is like both, like how do you do that well?
Such a good question. I think I just appreciate you naming that, Helen, because that is part of the reality of I'm trying to tell people to make work less big, but work takes up so much of our lives. And so
Yeah.
it's naturally going to take a big place.
Yeah. I was also wanting to provide context with this question because I think that the world is changing so much because, like, to your point, we're working remotely. And so it is easy to turn off work, but it doesn't really turn off in our heads. And what was your answer?
I think you got to fight really, really hard to make it as small as it can be. Even
Mm,
if it is a big place, how can we not make it the whole story? How can we not make work your whole life? First, just want to acknowledge that sometimes it takes privilege to be able to do that, to be able to
mm-hmm.
work less or to be able to work a certain sort of job where you don't have to work as much. So first, just want to acknowledge that. I think
Yeah.
the other thing that comes to mind is how do you spend that time outside of work? So I know for me, something that I would do that was really unhelpful is I would work my job, see my clients, and then after work, I would just go on screens and then I would ruminate about my clients. And it felt like because of that, my whole life was centering around work because when I wasn't working, I was often anticipating the job or ruminating about the job or numbing out as a result of the difficult emotions I was experiencing about the job. Everything I was doing in my life, everything that was going on in my head, all revolved around work. And I
Mm,
think that was really, really unhealthy and reinforced just how important work was. And so I think it's crucial to fight to do things outside of work that remind yourself of your other identities. There's this really amazing book I'll recommend called The Good Enough Job by, I think it's pronounced Simone Stolzoff. So
mm,
it was really helpful for me. And I think one of the main suggestions offered in the book is to diversify your identity, to do different sorts of things so
mm-hmm.
that not all your eggs are in one basket. And so I think for me, it's super crucial to do things like I love dance. So I'll go to a dance studio after work or spend time with friends, or because I'm a perfectionist, I've been trying to find things that don't tap into more of my perfectionist tendencies because sometimes
Mm,
even my hobbies become a new realm for perfectionism. Like
amen.
baking, I get so obsessed with, oh my gosh, it doesn't look like it looked on the Great British Baking Show. So
Mm-hmm.
I will do things that it's less easy for me to become perfectionist. So things like reading, I'm not really going to judge how perfect I am, or walking or stretching, just doing other sorts of things that remind me that I'm a much fuller person than my work self.
That's so beautiful. I remember I was in therapy during my burnout recovery, and I've been working with my therapist since I was 18 or 19. And I was just describing my job, and she looks at me and she goes, Helen, what do you like about yourself? And I said, well, I like that I love dressing in bright colors. I like that I'm very detail oriented. I like that I'm curious about people. It's what got me into the job. And she said, why don't you think about the end in mind and just like incorporate the things that you like into the job as opposed to making the job define you? And I really hear what you're saying of, I love dance, I love movement, I love being able to work with creativity in that way. And so what I did when I was recovering from burnout is I said, okay, who am I fundamentally at my core, and how can it be reflected in the work that I do? And at the time, I think when I first started working at Yellow Chair, I would have a podcast interview every single week. And the lack of segmentation really affected my brain pattern of, I wasn't, I wasn't functioning in my authenticity. And so the flexibility and the privilege to shift my schedule and change things around was super helpful for me. But it's different for everyone, because you might be working at a convenience store and just like saying hello to people, but the simple act of just wearing your favorite color or like asking someone how their day went might make things a bit better, you know. Um, I think going back to what I said earlier, life isn't an and or, it's a both. So like how can I find joy in this moment? Like how can I connect with a human being in this authentic way? Because even what we're doing, like we're actually working, but this is a meaningful conversation to be had, you know?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that example you gave of I am someone who loves to dress in bright colors. It sounds silly, but I think something like that is so important to cling to. I think these little particularities about ourselves, particularly things that we're less likely to define ourselves by and get all twisted, something just as simple as I love wearing bright colors. I think it's so important to hold on to that, to remember there's so much to ourselves. I think for me, I'm looking at a candle right now because I'm just someone who loves nice smelling things.
Yes.
And so recently I've been thinking, okay, I need to tap into this side of me and start lighting more candles. And so I think that is really, really important. And then the other thing you said that I want to explore a little bit more, Helen, you talked about how you're trying to bring your full self into work. And I think that's super important. And I want to nuance that by talking about an idea that was mentioned in that book, where I think we look to our jobs as the only place where we can actualize ourselves. There's this sense of my job is the only place where I will live out my passions, my purpose, my value. It's all contained in work, and it puts so much pressure on the job. I like to refer to this concept of soul career. I don't really believe in soulmates, this idea that there's someone perfectly meant there for me, but I totally have bought into this idea of soul career, where there's one job out there that's the perfect alignment of my passions, of the world's needs, of my gifts and strengths. And I think having that mentality can place just so much weight on what a job needs to do for you. And then it really diminishes the beauty of your life outside of the work, the ways that maybe you live out your life's purpose when you're not working, or maybe you engage in your passions when you're not working. And I think these ideas around your job being everything became popularized as a way to give meaning to our work, which isn't fully bad, but I think the conclusions that they came to were too big about what work should be.
There's so many ideas to unpack from what you just said, Megan. But one of the things that comes to mind is like soul career. I have this neighbor named Pat. She's retired. She's 84 actually. And I ran into her at my parents' driveway, and she goes, honey, how are you doing? And I was just telling her about my life. And she paused. She looked at me. She looked me up and down. She's like, can I be honest with you? And I said, yeah, always. And she said, you need to relax. And I was like, what? What do you mean? And she goes, you're 27. It's like, you're so young. It's like, why are you overthinking your job, your dating life, everything? It's like, whatever happened to being fun? She's like, what? How are you having fun? And she said something to me that actually helped my job. She said, dating is not about finding the one. Dating is about figuring out who you are. And in the process of figuring out who you are, you do find someone that is a date worth keeping. And then that's where it kind of clicked in my head of, oh, our job, what if we looked at it more of a place for self-exploration, of the figuring out of ourselves? What if we looked at life in that way and just zoomed out a little bit? Maybe it'll tell us about who we are and what we bring to the table. Because I think that the good enough job concept, I think she's trying to flip the dynamic on its head, where it's not about finding a job, it's about becoming the person that you want to be through these experiences. And as a result, you end up creating the life that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you put that really well. Well, first of all, just want to acknowledge, shout out to Pat. Pat sounds really wise.
She was married to Jim for 50 years, and she was an elementary school teacher. She's still living. Actually was texting her the other day, but she was telling me, like, there's so many different things that add to your life. Like, she used to do, her husband died 3 years ago, and he used to be a ski racer and the race car driver. He actually died driving racing cars, which is like such a cool way to die. But he was like a engineer writer. And she said that was just a way to make money, but who we were outside of our jobs, like, that added to the job. So in a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of Severance, and how I don't know if we've talked about Helly yet, but I feel like Helly is a really extreme character of someone that doesn't want to work. And I feel like there's so many people now that don't want to work. I mean, respectfully. And so I feel like we've been talking about, because we both function as very high achievers. What do you think about Helly? What do you think Helly represents?
Am I allowed to give spoilers in this
You
show?
can give spoilers. Go ahead.
Okay, well, this is
people are watching this.
Massive spoiler. So if you haven't watched the show, don't listen to this part.
Skip.
And then come back. So Helly is fascinating because we find out at the end that her outie, so the one who chose to do the severance procedure, is related to the founders of this company, Lumen. And so the reason why she chose to do it is to gain more followers for this procedure. But her innie hates it. Her innie does not understand what's going on. She does not like working at Lumen, and she's desperate to stop and to get out, to the point where she tries to kill herself at one point.
Yeah.
And that whole thing is fascinating. Something I love about Helly is because from the get-go, Helly's attitude is, I don't want to be here. I don't understand what's going on. This place is crazy. And she doesn't buy into this idea of loyalty to the company. And this company is like your family and it's wonderful for you, that a lot of her colleagues buy into. And one of the things that I really love about the show, I think it's done very well, is the show makes fun of the concept of company perks. So if the employees optimize their job of defining macro data, which no one knows what that means, but if they do it and they hit certain quotas, they get these really silly rewards like finger traps or a caricature portrait or a waffle party is the big prize. And it sounds so silly, but I think it actually highlights this very real thing that happens in our world, which as much as I talk about the woes of capitalism, I love free merch and the benefits
Megan does,
that
everybody.
corporate
Really
companies give. I've toured Google once, I toured Sony, and I was head over heels with all the perks, with the nap pods, the Lego room, the good food.
I gotta say, it's the best. I remember I did a corporate engagement for Yellow Chair, actually, and there was all of that in that corporate place that I went to, and I was like, this is so cool. But you never want to leave. That's
the point.
Yeah.
That is the point. I think I would never leave
because it's open access.
If I was in one of those places.
Yeah, you can just walk in whenever you want. You can use their gym, you can use their spa, you can use their services, but you can't ever stop working at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
The idea behind it, I think at its worst, is that these perks are to incentivize employees to keep working without acknowledging or recognizing the cost of doing so. And Helly never gets wrapped up in that. Helly's like, this melon bar or these finger traps are dumb. What is that supposed to get me to do? I would not be as strong as Helly. I would be like, waffle party? I'm going to work so hard for that. And so I think it's really important to be attuned to what are these rewards justifying, and should they be justifying what we say they do?
It's hard to talk about her without being judgmental of her, for me, because I remember watching it and going, why don't you just do what they want you to do? Like at one point, I think she got punished and she had to read like this long religious like belief text 1,000 times before she actually had a genuine apology. But I think, one of the things that I really found about Helly is that she's a really healthy skeptic of, there are allusions to work being the new religion now that, people are believing less and less in God, and people are transitioning more into spirituality and less in religious practices. But there's something to be said about work being its own religion, and there are some people that are skeptical of that. And so I find her to be like this really interesting foil compared to Mark, who seems to be really bought into the philosophy of everything. What do you think about their dynamic together? Like these two polar opposite personalities, these two innies coming together and thinking different things.
Yeah, well, I think it highlights some of the conversation we've had today of how the people around you can really shape your perception.
Wow.
Because I think it's through meeting Helly and encountering her skepticism, her criticism of Lumen Industries, that Mark starts to question too. There's also some other plot points that lead him to question more and more. But I think it's through that encounter that he starts to examine and question some of the things happening at work. And I think it just highlights how important it is to be in community, and maybe to particularly be in community with people with differing opinions from us.
That's so good. There's so many points where you kind of have to like let yourself be subjected to all of these different views to change. Like if you want something to change, you have to change something. To your point about there were so many different moments that Mark started to shift. There was this early scene where his best friend coworker, Petey, quits, and then Petey comes back and tries to warn Mark, but Mark's Audi doesn't recognize Petey. And then Petey, spoiler alert, dies from a brain aneurysm because he can't cope with the severance of being separated. And so I guess like the way I understood it, because I didn't watch it as closely as you did, Megan, was when you try to convince other people, or you try to make it your mission to convince other people of your belief system, you're not really out into the world. You're still kind of in. I'm still really confused by that concept. But what do you think PD represents in the show?
Yeah, the show is very confusing.
It's super philosophical,
no worries
I feel.
If you're confused.
Yeah.
I think PD he highlights the dangers of Lumen Industries and the severance procedure. because he has a different window, because he has done this process of reintegration where he is back to being one full person.
Wow.
And he knows so much about Lumen because now it's not just his innie self, but his innie and outer self are back to being merged into one. It does lead to a lot of medical complications and ultimately his death, as you mentioned. But I think that example of showing the dangers of what work can be is really important, because I think, I was harping on corporate perks, but it's not just corporate perks that get us to justify making work too important. It's other rewards too, like the rewards we get from our peers or our parents, that sort of admiration or the approval that we long for so much, or even for our own selves, the sense of, ooh, if I can get a certain job or if I can be good enough at my job, then I'll finally accept myself. And so it's these other sorts of rewards that then justify how much we give to our work. And sometimes it's in pursuit of those rewards that we blind ourselves to all the consequences and the dangers of identifying too much by work. For me, it's been crucial to remember those consequences. And I've now experienced them several times of have to remember what the deep depression it feels like. I have to remember what it's like to feel like my life is bad just because work is bad. I have to remember what it's like to devalue all the good things in my life, my friends, my marriage, my hobbies, because all I care about is work. I have to remember that so that I don't get so caught up in the possible rewards of those identity boosters I mentioned earlier, or approval or affirmation from others or making more money or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And with grace and compassion for that as well, knowing that I've also been in that space. Like, I don't think I'm done, but I think I'm at the most healthiest place I've ever been when it comes to de-identifying and reintegrating, using severance language. But for me, it took 2 years, almost 2 years, a year and a half to get back into a healthy place in my body. And when I experienced burnout, like I still get stomach complications from time to time when I'm stressed. Like I still experience grogginess or lack of sleep whenever I'm stressed about work, but it comes and goes, and I have to be in tune with myself. And it sounds like you've also done the work too, Megan, of figuring out, what is my body telling me? What do I need to do? What steps do I need to take? It's kind of like, when people talk about Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12-step program, I feel like all of us need that in some ways,
Yeah, totally. I think AA does such a good job of being really honest with the problem and naming it as such and naming that the tendency to struggle. And I think if we did that, probably be a little bit healthier too.
So I want to respect your time because I know we're almost at the 45-minute mark. I want to end with one more question and then I'll let you go. But I want you to picture yourself at 85 and you get to have a conversation with her and you can only ask her one question. What would that question be?
This is so hard. Okay, so I'm asking my 85-year-old self a question.
One question. And you have to tell me why that question.
I think I would ask, do you see yourself and the world around you as good?
Do you see yourself and the world around you as good? Wow. Why that question?
I think it ties a lot into the themes we talked about today. I think so often for me, defining myself by work was out of the sense of not trusting that I'm already good, not trusting in that worth that we talked about. And so excelling in work, being the best at work, it was a way to earn goodness. And I think when you're operating in that place, another common dynamic is you're also comparing yourself to others, ranking, how do I compare to other people, how good they are? And there's a sense that there's a hierarchy of goodness rather than everyone being equally good. And so that's why I make the question, do I see myself and others as good? Because I would hope that by the time I'm 85, I would not only have this deep assurance and confidence in my own goodness, but also be able to see so clearly the goodness of others too.
That's so good. Thanks for sharing yourself with us, Megan. I appreciate you.
It was my pleasure. I also want to acknowledge, Helen, you said something earlier of how you noticed now that I'm more silly, more goofy. And for the listeners who don't know, Helen and I have a standing meeting once a week. And I don't know, I just feel so seen by that because it's so true. I think
Yeah.
when I wasn't doing well, I would come into those meetings not really my full self and just trying to get through. But now that I'm doing a lot better, I'm able to be more of myself and to bring these different parts. I've felt very seen by you in that.
Good. Well, I've just noticed that your humor is coming out, and I was like, this is actually a really new version of you I've never seen before, and I'm grateful that I get to witness to that.
Thanks, Helen. I really appreciate it.
Of course.